Good evening. You are listening to Right on Campus, the UW-Eau Claire College Republican podcast. Good evening. You're listening to Right on Campus, the UW-Eau Claire College Republicans podcast. As always, I'm Ryan, the vice chair of the UWEC College Republicans. I'm here joined with my co-host and working partner Tatiana, the chair of UWEC College Republicans.
Hello, everyone.
We're also joined with our club secretary, Cam.
Hello.
Our club treasurer, Maddie.
Hey guys, it's Madeline.
And our club political coordinator, Lizzie.
Hey, guys.
We have a little bit of a different episode for y'all tonight. Tonight we're going to be having a panel discussion on the differences in the conservative stances on the death penalty. Tonight we'll be having Cam as our moderator for this discussion. With that being said, Cam, go ahead and take it away.
Hey guys, so I'm Cam, and also just a reminder, I'm like a criminal justice major, so I'm going to sort of be moderating this discussion because I also just had a class on the death penalty, so I was hoping to lead this a bit tonight. So just, we're going to have everyone go around just to briefly state their stance on the death penalty.
Hi, so it's Lizzie, and my stance on the death penalty is I am completely against it.
Hi, I'm Madeline, and I am on the same side as Lizzie. I am against the death penalty.
I'm Tatiana, as you guys know, and I'm a little bit different, but I am pro-death penalty, but I'm hesitant to be pro-death penalty in today's America.
I'm Ryan, and I am pro-death penalty.
All right, so to start us off, I'm going to sort of have like I'd like to say brief, but we'll see how brief I can actually get this. Introduction, just like a little bit of history on the death penalty. So the death penalty or capital punishment has been used for a really long time. It goes all the way back to like what is known as Hammurabi's law, which is sort of like an eye for an eye. So like if you kill someone, they'll do the same thing to you, sort of situation. It first was used in the United States in the Jamestown colony in Virginia in 1608, where they executed Captain George Kendall for being a spy for Spain. He was executed by a firing squad, and that was the most common form of capital punishment at the time. And currently, 27 states have the death penalty. And in California, Ohio, and Oregon, they have a moratorium, which just puts a brief pause on the death penalty as they review it more extensively. So over time, many states have began to reduce the number of crimes punishable by death. It used to be a lot bigger of a list, but now it's kind of just like the most heinous crimes, mostly used for homicide. And then there are a few different cases that I wanted to highlight. So in my class, we talked a lot about the court case of Furman v. Georgia, which was in 1972. It was a landmark Supreme Court case that led to a moratorium of the death penalty, which again just puts a brief pause on it as they review more cases and more extensively about it to determine whether or not it is cruel and unusual punishment. At the time, it was ruled that how the death penalty was being used was cruel and unusual. Because it was, like, at the time, again, it was used in a very arbitrary and inconsistent manner. It was seemingly random. And then another case I wanted to highlight is Gregg v. Georgia, which was in 1976, just 4 years later. This case reinstated the death penalty, so it established that it was not unconstitutional under all circumstances. But that case introduced some guided discretion statutes. So there's these few new standards that were brought upon for it. So bifurcated trials were required. This is a 2-stage trial, which separates determination of guilt from determination of sentence. And then the automatic appellate review of sentences and convictions, and state appellate courts must compare the sentence to similar cases before it in proportionality review, which is later not a requirement established in Pulley v. Harris in 1984. It's a good safeguard, but it's not required. So since the Furman v. Georgia case, this is known as like the post-Furman era. Then a few other cases I wanted to highlight that kind of specify the limitations of the death penalty. First one is Atkins v. Georgia. This goes over like intellectual disability in capital punishment cases. So this case was in 2022, and they determined that executing people with intellectual disabilities is unconstitutional. Part of the reason for this is that 18 states also determined this before the Supreme Court case was held. And the next one was Coker v. Georgia. This determined that capital punishment is not admissible in cases of rape of adult women when victims are not killed. So capital punishment for crime other than murder basically is excessive and in violation of the Eighth Amendment. And then the last case I wanted to highlight is Roper v. Simmons, which prohibits the death penalty for juveniles who commit crimes before the age of 18. Just kind of stating, like, similar to the intellectual disabilities, that juveniles are not as culpable as adults are when making these decisions. So next we're just going to move on to a few questions. So first we have, does the death penalty fit into every society/era?
Yeah, I don't see why not. My stance on that probably would be that crime is heinous, no matter the time period. And violent crime, especially murder and rape, are insulting the dignity of the innocents or victims involved. And I think the method of how we go about it, it shouldn't be something that we run around and round people up and there's no trials or anything. That's obviously wrong. But the fact that there are always crimes that have been and will continue to be considered viciously heinous, I think is enough evidence for me to support that the death penalty probably has always been and will always continue to be looked at as an option to deal with specifically heinous crimes.
I'm gonna counter that. I don't think that it fits in any context. You mentioned like the dignity of the person, and I think that taking anybody's life, even given the crimes that they have committed, no matter how heinous, doesn't constitute you taking their life. You don't right or wrong by doing another wrong. And yeah, I think because over different time periods and eras, different definitions and different stigmas surrounding certain crimes changes. So the death penalty isn't something that's going to be able to adapt with that just because it ends a life. And it's not something that you can ever go back on once you take that life.
So I agree with part of what you said. Obviously, I'm pro death penalty, so I don't agree with it all. But I think that I don't think that, to answer the question, I don't think that the death penalty fits within every society. And I think, looking at some of the extremes like Nazi Germany is a great example of that. Like in a society where they don't understand the value of life and don't understand that every life is valuable, I think it can be taken out of hand and used, in the wrong way. But I think where I disagree with you, Maddie, is, you said that, it shows the dignity of life, to preserve that life. And I think it almost does the opposite. It kind of cheapens life in my perspective, because when somebody commits a crime and kills another life, I think it is important that we show society that that is punishable and that we will protect society from that, from occurring, and that we don't tolerate that.
A follow-up question. Does the death penalty prevent crimes like that from happening? Is that something that's backed by statistics?
It's a good question. I don't necessarily have statistics right up here in front of me, but I will tell you that the main point of criminal justice is threefold. Rehabilitation, which is the one we do a lot of talking about nowadays. A lot of people like to say that, we should only be rehabilitating criminals, which is not the point, right? I think we probably can all agree on that. The second would be deterrence, and so if you have like an empirical study to support this or not, it has been the standard that if the state and the community is to put up a standard that says, here are our rules, you cannot break these rules or you will be subject to X penalty, fines, tickets, jail time, or death if they choose that. I think that just sends a message from the law abiders and from those who are organizing the society to the criminals or to those who would like to deviate away from that. That's, hey, you can't do this. And then the third is retribution. And it sounds mean, but it is important for us to understand that when a criminal violates the dignity of another person, they're not just violating that person's dignity, they're violating the sanctity of the rule of law of the society, and then must be punished for that. Because we want to live in a society of law abiders, people who deviate from that need to be held accountable, and a prison or the death penalty then would be a form of retribution as well.
So I want to make an argument for kind of that, where the American Civil Liberties Union has stated that there's no credible evidence that the death penalty deters crime more effectively than long terms of imprisonment.
Mm-hmm.
And I would probably argue to your other point on why can't we just do life imprisonment in that point? Because if it doesn't deter, why not just do life imprisonment where we keep also the value of that person's life as well?
Mm-hmm.
I also want to add one more statistical piece of evidence here. So the Death Penalty Information Organization took rates of murder in death penalty states versus non-death penalty states and compared that. And if it is supposed to deter crime rates, the trend should be that the death penalty states have lower murder rates. And in every year from 1990 to 2000, when the study was conducted, all of the death penalty states actually had higher murder rates, which I thought was very interesting.
Yeah, maybe an anecdotal piece of evidence. So, Maddie, you and I are both from Illinois, and so you'll know that the city of Chicago has this no chase kind of situation going on with the police. They also have declassified. What is it? It's tickets or jail time or whatever for theft under $2,000. So what has happened to convenience stores in the city of Chicago? Everything is locked up because criminals will go in there and steal. And you go online and we see all these videos of people. And I think that may be where the deterrence piece comes in, where it's just like if you have, granted, it's also a low trust society, which is there too. But if you have a standard being set that's like, if you steal anything, you're going to be held accountable for that. I would be led to believe that would reduce or maybe prevent a higher level of crime, considering that the opposite has done the inverse, that when we lax our rules, we've seen more crime, more nonviolent, petty crime. And granted, I mentioned before, and I don't have anything that would suggest that, somebody who is wanting to commit a murder isn't going to think, hey, I'm going to die in the process of this if I get caught. If they're really set on doing it, then they're going to do it. But I not to totally derail, but just to pull it back to the initial question about maybe what was the initial question?
Does the death penalty fit into every society /era?
Yeah, well, something that was said at the beginning was just you can't necessarily forfeit your dignity, which I would need to do more thinking on. But I think we've talked before as a group about our support for the right of self-defense. And so when someone breaks into your house and comes at you with a gun or has intent to do harm to you and your family, that person has now forfeited their ability to their right to life. If they come into your home and intend to do imminent harm to you, they have now forfeited their right to live. And I stand by that. And I think it may be applicable to the state. When someone commits a very heinous act, kills someone, or maybe a rape, murder, or not, they have significantly violated the dignity of the innocent person, and I think it's a responsible solution by the state to say, hey, this isn't okay, and you need to be held accountable for your crimes.
I want to back up real quick to the self-defense aspect of it, would you consider the death penalty a form of self-defense?
Well, not in the traditional sense that someone's breaking into your house, but like, I mean, maybe a form of preventative self-defense, and maybe,
Yeah.
and it's also ex post facto. It's not just that we're preventing, this from happening. The fact is that it's already happened, and yeah, sure, if we put them in prison forever, then theoretically they're not going to commit again. But with that being said, I think it's important for us to understand that we need to have a firm set standard that says, no, you can't. It's wrong for you to do these things, commit these violent acts against the innocent. And
There's a hierarchy in a sense
Right.
too, because
Right.
there's a lot of crimes that you can have life in prison for that you can't have death penalty for. And I think it's important that we have that distinction that there are crimes that are worse than others, and there are punishments for those crimes that are worse than others.
Right. So when people commit these crimes, they more than likely know what they're doing is wrong, and they do it anyways.
fully willed.
And
Yeah.
yes, fully willed. And so whether you have the death penalty or not, they're going to do it anyways. So why are you going to institute a death penalty when there's the chance that maybe they could be wrongfully convicted, or things like that?
I mean, I think, we have a process in place that I think is pretty strong from what I've seen. It's not like a ton of people are getting wrongfully convicted. I mean, even for the most part, a lot of people who are convicted don't end up actually getting the death penalty. And, like it's not like a ton of people are being executed. It's truly saved for very heinous crimes.
Well, what I found while looking this stuff up, I found that for every 8 people on death row, one of them has later been found innocent or has been exonerated in that way. So I feel like there is some lacking ability on our criminal justice system on who are finding wrongfully convicted or not.
Yeah. Well, like then I don't know if you have it in front of you or whatnot, but I mean, are there any countries that get this right 100% of the time?
Yeah.
Like, are there any justice systems out there that get this right 100% of the time?
No, and I think that's what's so dangerous about it is human error.
Because we're messing with people's lives.
But I
Sure.
think they forfeited that life when they took someone else's.
But now you're getting to dangerous territory on the value of life. That means that value of life can be taken away.
Absolutely.
I disagree.
I think value of life can be taken away by the justice system, but not, if we want to get into a philosophical view, I don't think your value of life is ever taken away at the religious level, at the way that God views you. But I think that your value within society is taken away.
So then why do we have that right then to take that value away? If God does not have that right to
We
take
didn't
the value...
take it away, they took it away.
Okay, but they still have inherent dignity. They still have dignity, and they still have that value because they were created.
Yes, they have value in the eyes of God, but not in the eyes of the justice system, is the way I look at it. That they have forfeited their right in that way. And so yes, I agree with you that there is still redemption in Jesus Christ. And if that person, on death row gave their life to Jesus, I fully believe that they would end up in heaven that day. But, taking out of the religious aspect of it and looking at it from the eyes of the justice system, I don't think that that's the same thing. And I think that, they gave up their value in society when they began murdering, innocent people.
Yeah, but are we any better then for taking away that right to life? Doesn't that make us equally?
No, absolutely
I don't
not.
think,
And
but I
I-
don't
Well,
think
how many murders have you committed?
I've not committed any
And
murders,
do you plan to?
unless you count cows or something.
Yeah, that's right, but that's a good
Wisconsin.
distinction, right? Is between murder and killing, and we as upstanding, good, faithful members of society are able to kill in self-defense, another human in self-defense. But yeah, I mean, I hunt, and hunting is an ethical practice of killing. It's not murder. Murder is the intent to take someone's life away, and I think it's important to make the distinction between the fact that it's sure that this person has dignity in the sense that, yeah, they're here, they're created, but they have lived their life separate from the truth, and they've willfully made that decision to not just maybe not go to mass and not pray and not practice, but they've also made the decision to murder an innocent person willfully. And so, yeah, I think we to compare society who would permit a due process justice system to have a trial by jury of your peers, to go through an appellate system, and in some cases, like Cam was mentioning, go all the way up to the supreme level of the court. And then, like Tatiana said, sometimes they wait for a very, very long time, and there's more processes involved. Yeah, no, I think it's just, and if there's an ethical and just way of going about it, then no, we're not the same as murderers.
Yeah, I wanted to comment off what you said about the truth.
Yeah.
Do you trust society's definition of truth? Like, do you trust people enough who are flawed and imperfect? Do you trust their truth system?
No, I believe in the truth.
Okay, but can society accurately define the truth?
I mean, it's a loaded question. Society can come to know the truth, but the truth is Jesus Christ and God. But the church can be informed of the truth, and if we're talking about human beings, yeah, I mean, human beings can come to know truth. But
then if that is the truth and like what we all here agree on is the truth,
yep.
Then who are we to step in and act as the truth if there is only one truth? We're not the truth. If Jesus Christ is the truth, who are we to step in that role?
So I would say that we step in and we carry out the truth every single day in our justice system. When we say murder is wrong, that is, we are...
But then we're killing that person.
Yes.
We say murder is wrong, but then we're killing the person
But
who did that.
murder is wrong, killing is not. And so I think, or take any law, stealing. We know stealing is wrong. And, we're not defining truth by saying stealing is wrong. We are implementing truth. And to your point, at the beginning of the podcast episode, I did clarify that in today's America, I'm a little hesitant with the death penalty, and it's for that exact reason that I worry that...
Yeah, we don't need to be getting carried away. We definitely don't need to be getting carried away with this. And like theft and petty crimes, obviously not. I mean, that would be heinous. But I watched what was it? Not 13 Hours. It's Patriots Day, Boston bombing, and in 2013 or whatever. And that guy killed all those people at the marathon, and it's just vicious to have to watch and think that like he's sitting in a jail cell somewhere. And he fully was intent in committing a mass atrocity. And I think my personal opinion is you can forfeit that right. And Tatiana made a good point of the implementation of truth and using that through the justice system.
Yeah, and that makes sense, but I think you also just have to also keep in mind like forgiveness if we are going based off of this truth. Because that is something that I think is emphasized in the truth that we were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, to sort of wrap this question up,
Yeah.
I just want to touch on the standard of the evolving standards of decency. So this sort of originated about 100 years ago. I think it was in 1910 in the Supreme Court case Weems v. United States. So this just helps assess what is cruel and unusual in the context of today's society. So we'll kind of see, a few hundred years ago, if you know what drawing and quartering is, I won't get into it because it's kind of gory, but that was, kind of a common method of execution. But now as a society, we moved past that. We think that's a terrible form of punishment. So I think I'm just kind of interested to see how society progresses now because we keep seeing more and more states outline capital punishment. So... But yeah, I think everybody had really good points there. So,
yeah.
Next question I have here is how would you modify the limitations, grounds for the death penalty, and methods of execution? So, I just want to kind of touch on the different methods of executions. So there's the five main ones. So there's lethal injection. This one is the most commonly used. There can be, I think, 2 or 3 drugs used for it. Since its implementation, there has been 75 botched executions. I I just kind of find the numbers of botched executions kind of interesting, so I'm gonna throw that in there. But and then nitrogen gas, like used in the gas chamber, like that also has been known to be very like painful. Its first initial use was like hopefully to just kind of have someone like go to sleep, and then you put like the gas in the room, and they would just kind of like die in their sleep. But it's a lot more painful than people think. And then electrocution is also a more common method of execution. Fun fact: Thomas Edison was part of the creation of it. So
No way. Well, I guess that makes sense, right?
yeah, I mean Alfred Southwick was the one who like invented it, but like Thomas Edison kind of further like worked on it. But yeah, it's interesting. And then firing squad. This is the only one where there has been 0 botched executions. It's not very common anymore. It used to be a lot more common. Like the first execution was by firing squad, like in the United States. And then there's hanging. It was the most primary method up until like the late 1800s. That one definitely is a bit, like there's been a lot more botched executions that way, which you don't really think about. But so yeah, just to like reiterate the question again, how would you modify the limitations, ground for the death penalty, and methods of execution?
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier, like I'm not bloodthirsty. Like I like the justice system and I want it to work properly. Yeah, I hate the idea that maybe some people have been and can be wrongfully executed. With that being said, like I think obviously we should look towards ethical and humane and quick ways of executing those on death row. So if that is through lethal injection, great. I don't know much about this nitrogen gas. It sounds like you're getting your air sucked out of your lungs, and that's got to be really painful. Electric chair is pretty aggressive. I actually don't hate the idea of a firing squad, and considering that there's no botched executions and one. I mean, it doesn't need to be a firing squad face the wall kind of thing, but like one swift out. That's it.
Yeah,
no
like
pain involved with that.
It's
so,
very painless. So
exactly.
like, I'm against the death penalty, but like if we had to have the death penalty, I feel like that would be the most ethical.
Right.
Even though it's like the least common right now.
Right.
But like it's over and done with in a second.
In
so,
1 second. Yeah.
Yeah, that's where I stand too. I think that honestly, I think firing squad is probably the most humane. And one thing that we haven't talked a ton about that I think I would also change with the death penalty. I'm kind of on the fence about it, but I lean towards kind of changing. Is the idea of like you can watch an execution occur, like the family members of the victim, or police involved and stuff like that. And I don't know. I feel like that's a bit extreme. I understand that for closure reasons, a lot of families choose to do so. But I guess I just don't fully understand it. So
What if you had to watch your daughter die in your arms?
I think it would be
'Cause of
just
that
as
criminal.
bad to watch someone else die. I don't think I could do it. But maybe there's something to be said for freedom of choice there.
Sure.
But yeah, I think a firing squad, but I don't think we're gonna get firing squad brought back. I think people see it as too inhumane because just the perception of it.
Right.
But I do think it's probably the least painful, quickest. But I think lethal injection makes sense, and nitrogen gas. I don't know, like kind of like you had. Interested to hear more about it.
I think something to consider with the different modes for committing the death penalty is just how expensive it is, which I guess would be another point that I'd make against it if you're a numbers person. 9 years on death row is much more expensive than if somebody was to just continue out the rest of their life in prison. Just because you have to ensure that they don't commit suicide, so you have to provide extra security. The confinement costs, the court costs and prosecution costs, the type of death penalty thing that you use costs money too.
So tying into all the economic costs, so I learned all about this in my capital punishment class, and it just baffled me how expensive it is. So first of all, like the average stay on death row is 186 months, which, like, even for someone to just be in jail for that long is pretty expensive. But just like the whole trial process can be so incredibly expensive. Like the investigation takes 3 to 5 times longer than other non-capital cases, which can be like over $40,000. There are motions filed, which take a lot of time to like research, write, and submit, and the experts are paid for their research or their consultations. And like, for example, like psychiatrists, they are usually paid like between $500 to $1,000 a day. And then like defense expert witnesses alone cost more than $40,000. And because it is a bifurcated trial, many expenses of the guilty phase may be duplicated into the penalty phase. So the average cost for like a capital punishment trial is like over $500,000. And it's about $320,000 for a non-capital punishment case. And that is for 9 days, and whereas a capital punishment trial will usually last over 30 days. So, yeah, there's that. And then there's like the automatic appeals that have to go into effect, which basically could duplicate the cost of the initial trial. And then also the cost of each execution. So for hanging, it is $850,000. For electric chair, it is $350,000. Just kidding, $85,000 for hanging. And then for the gas chamber, $200,000. Firing squad, $250,000 or 20. Sorry, I can't read.
This is
today.
including all
Wow.
of like the legal fees
25,000.
and expenses, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so
But-
my answer to this is, quite frankly, I don't really care. We spend so much money on so much unnecessary stuff, and I support the death penalty. And so if this is what it's going to take for us to ensure that people have fair and due process in their trials, so be it. Like, what's $500,000 to the American taxpayer? I don't know. Is that the wrong take to have? It's just like we send $200 billion in foreign aid to some of these countries so they can fight their wars. Like, we can't commit, our justice. We can't commit some money to making sure our justice system is carried out in an effective and just way. I don't see a problem with that. So
Just to kind of finish off my point, life without parole is about 2.5 to 5 times cheaper than someone on death row, and the average cost, like in Texas, the average cost for the whole trial and everything for someone on death row is $4 million, and others may average down to $2 million or even higher than that. So, but yeah, you make a good point.
Going off of those statistics, I also have that the California death penalty costs $137 million per year, while a system of lifelong imprisonment as the maximum penalty would cost about $11.5 million.
wait, read that first number again.
$137 million.
Like in total. Yeah.
And that's actually only for 14 people who have been executed since 1970.
So is there no way that we could like make this process maybe a little more efficient?
Well, my question to you would be, you guys are for a humane death penalty, correct?
Sure. Yeah.
Why?
Why does it have to be humane if you're taking away their that's really interesting actually.
So, I mean, we're not advocating for torture here. We're advocating for justice.
Right,
But-
because the law protects against cruel and unusual punishment. So I don't think we should be
Isn't the death penalty cruel and unusual punishment?
it's ethical and it's quick, and so that would not be cruel. It's also not unusual, whereas like torturing someone would be. Now, granted, personally, I obviously don't think we should be torturing people, but I believe in the efficacy of the death penalty, and I think we should be, making it as efficient as possible will probably make the entire process maybe more efficient, like we're just talking about. I understand like the legal costs of going through the courts and paying for lawyers and all of this stuff. I get that it's going to cost us money. One box of 9mm Luger costs $22 a case. So I don't really understand how we're running the cost up to $800,000. It just doesn't make sense to me. And so like it's one, that's a drop in the bucket of what we spend on other things, and two, we could make this a whole heck of a lot cheaper if we really wanted to.
Yeah, I do agree with that. The problem with like making it take less time and like hopefully making it more efficient is the risk of error.
That's not
Which
what
then
I'm
would,
not
like-
advocating for that. I'm not advocating for less time. I'm advocating for the execution method to be more efficient.
Yeah,
and
no,
that's
I
where your
think
costs
exactly.
come from, because if you are trying to kill somebody using the death penalty, they have
Yeah.
to be alive to end their life.
Yeah.
And so they have to put security measures in for that and like keep them alive and all that stuff. And I think that's where a lot of your costs comes.
Yeah, no, and I've said I actually I'm in favor of that. We should. It's a good thing that we're taking as much time as we can, spending as much money as we need to ensure that yes, like that maybe we could reduce that 1 in 8 figure that you mentioned earlier. Like let's spend as much money as we have to ensure that that doesn't happen. But to me the money thing it matters less. So. That's just my stance on that question.
No, I would definitely agree with that. And like Ryan said, I think, looking at the cost of execution, I think we can definitely look at the method of execution and look to make that cheaper. But we're not saying, make the time itself shorter. Like, we know it's going to be expensive. That is part of what it is. But also, I think that a country is defined by how well it upholds justice and truth. And I think this is a way that we do that. So I think it's important that, we spend our money on something that does that.
Question to
Yeah.
follow up with the justice system. So, this might apply more to Tatiana just because she's, more on the side of maybe it doesn't fit as well in today's society.
Yeah.
At least in my eyes, we have more of a legal system than we do a justice system. And so
This is a good point.
if we have the death penalty, we're like entrusting humans to do right by that. So like I guess my question for you is like how would you combat that since you're for the death penalty? Is there even a way for you to combat that?
I mean, absolutely. I think, we have checks and balances in place, just like everything else in our country is run by humans. The president has the power to, start a war. Are we anti-war? And I think it's important that, we put people in place that we trust, and and that's our role as society, is to create a leadership of people that we can trust and that value truth and value justice. And like I've mentioned before, like our leadership right now is a little iffy, and so that's why I do get a little more hesitant in today's society. But if we have a leadership where we can trust it and we know that justice is being carried out, which I think, for a long time in America it was, I think that then I'm not worried about it, I guess.
Yeah, this is a really good question, Maddie, because I totally agree with you. Like we are shifting away from a truly justice-focused system and more towards a legal system. If you can pay for the right lawyer, you can get off, and that's a problem. The issue with this question is it's very macro, like it's very multifaceted. We're going to have to attack this in a lot of different ways. There's a lot of corruption involved. There's a lot of people, the people. There's a lot of we the people that just really don't care, like to be informed or care about being involved in the process. And I think maybe the way that we would be able to shift the justice system to be more just and less legal is a difficult question to answer because it's just so macro. But yeah, I think it's a good question because I totally can sympathize with the idea that if you grant the ability, theoretically, the wrong person could use that. Now, going back to where we were talking about the whole murder thing anyway, the person probably could, step into the territory of extrajudicial and if it's corrupt in the first place, it's not just. Those two things don't work. So I don't know. It's a difficult question, but it's a good one. So thank you.
So that kind of moves into the next question on here. What do you think is the role of the justice system?
I said this earlier: rehabilitation, deterrence, and retribution.
I think also, along with that, which this kind of ties into those, I think defending society as well, and protecting society from people who cannot seem to have a moral compass or follow a moral compass very well. I think, we see that, just in smaller crimes, with jail and stuff, like we take those people off the street so that they can no longer harm people. And I think, that's a form of self-defense as well.
Yeah, I kind of like the definition how you encapsulate everything, Ryan. I think that the purpose of a justice system is to protect the common good of society,
Right.
to restore public order,
For sure.
and work towards the rehabilitation or conversion of the offender, while always making sure that you're upholding the dignity that each person is inherently born with, just because we're all created in the image of Christ.
Yeah.
So my question would be, where does the death penalty really fit into that?
Yeah. You didn't mention the retribution part, and you pulled that from the catechism, didn't you? Or no?
I currently do not have the catechism up right now, but if you give me 2 seconds, I will pull it up.
No, it's okay. It sounded like something I read earlier from the catechism in preparation for this. And I just the one that we're missing here is retribution. And so this is where the death penalty fits in. Is the society has an interest in posing retribution on the criminals who have offended the innocent and justice in and of itself. It's wrong for people to be committing heinous acts against the individual because their dignity has been violated, and in doing so, that criminal has now forfeited their ability to be treated cushy. And so I don't know. I just stand by my previous definition of the justice system.
However, consequently, the church teaches, like even in the catechism, that the death penalty is inadmissible because it is an attack on the inviolability and dignity of that human person.
Right, but the church can't fully condemn the use of the death penalty because the church has endorsed the death penalty for thousands of years.
I don't think that the church represents Jesus Christ because we are imperfect human beings, but what I would want to say is that Christ's death on the cross ended the requirement for any other blood recompensance or blood sacrifice because he forgave every sin.
We're not. Yeah. Well, I wouldn't say we're having any. Maybe that is referring to blood sacrifice of, the Old Testament blood sacrifice in the sense that you're sacrificing, for favor. You don't have to do that, but blood does need to be shed. If somebody walked into this room right now and tried to take your lives, I would step in and I would do what I had to do. Yep. And there would not be one blot on my conscience for doing that, because in some cases it is right and it is just to shed blood.
I would argue that that's not the death penalty, though. Like, a person came in here right now, threatened all of our lives, you killed them. I would argue that's self-defense. The death penalty is not an act of self-defense, I would argue, because self-defense is an immediate threat to life. Exactly how you pointed out.
Sure.
As a person came in, that's an immediate threat to our lives. You have every right to go and take that person's life because that is immediate threat. But the death penalty, I would argue that is not a threat to life. That person, that's not an immediate threat to life. Mm-hmm. And also, the reason why the Catholic Church was for the death penalty and in the past years is because our prison system was not as great as it was before. It was not as secure. So the reason why it would have ever been for the death penalty is for the in case they were to break out, because our prison system was not great then. However, it has changed a lot and it's gotten more secure, I feel like.
Right. I think that's a fair take. But we're all familiar with St. Thomas Aquinas. He writes in Summa Theologica that he supports the death penalty as a legitimate response to serious crimes, particularly murder. He articulated that capital punishment serves the dual purpose of retribution and deterrence. And this is just his way of arguing that the death penalty can be carried out justly when followed through with due process.
piggybacking off of that, I mean, St. Thomas Aquinas isn't God, though.
No,
Nobody can ever come close to being God.
no,
And
absolutely.
I think
Totally agree.
as Christians, we're all called to forgive. And so I don't think the death penalty.
I think though forgiveness
that.
and justice can happen at the same time. You know, they're not separate from each other. I think that I can forgive someone for a heinous crime while also carrying out justice, you know, in the way of the death penalty.
Okay, so you think that you can, give forgiveness while ending someone else's life through the death penalty?
I mean, yes. I mean, I wouldn't use the term I give forgiveness, but yes, I could forgive somebody.
Well, so I think it's important to maybe consider too, because I like what you guys are saying, and it's resonating with me. But like when we think about Christ and his sacrifice, forgiveness can only be attained through repentance. And so if someone is to commit a heinous act and then love that they did it, is it our duty to forgive them?
I don't know if I agree with that. I don't think forgiveness can only be through repentance. I think forgiveness from God to us is only through repentance.
Right. That's kind of
But
what I was.
but I
saying.
can forgive
Oh, sure.
somebody without them repenting to me.
So I would like to
Sure.
bring up, like, you brought up the point of
Yeah.
repentance. Great point.
Yeah.
That's how we get to heaven. Love that.
Mm-hmm.
Can you repent if you're dead? Like, we're putting a time clock on their lifespan.
Mm-hmm.
Can they I'm not sure if that really condones or that helps them with their
I
repentance.
forget who says the quote, but it's nothing focuses a man more than when he is to be hanged in a fortnight, and I think it's like that quote kind of speaks to, okay, like if you are facing like this happens during war, like a lot of men will go to war and won't consider religion, will almost distance themselves from it. But when they start to see that, like, oh my goodness, my life is in imminent danger, it really focuses the mind, and it makes you really consider what matters. And so, yeah, I think, no, obviously not. Like when you die, granted, do we know? I mean, do we know if your soul can't repent on its way? Do we know?
Biblically, I don't know if that's accurate.
I mean, there's no way for us
But-
to know. So
but-
I don't know, but I'm just saying that, like, I think if it's wonderful, I think it's wonderful that if somebody were to be on death row and then, repents for their sins and cries out to the Lord, I hope they do that.
No, yeah.
Like, I actually hope they do that. But
And I think too, that
it doesn't excuse the fact that they have committed
no,
atrocity against
exactly.
the society.
And I like that you said they chose to do that, and they know the consequences of their actions. And when they chose to commit these heinous crimes, they chose to put that timestamp on their life.
They chose to put a timestamp on someone else's life.
Yeah.
Okay, so they chose to put a timestamp on someone else's life, and that's bad. Would we all agree on that?
Well, yeah, because it's murder.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're putting a timestamp on someone else's life then when you're giving them the death penalty.
No, I would argue that they put that timestamp on
They
themselves.
they fully chose knowing that this is they're gonna get caught, or that if they do get caught, this is what could happen to them.
Yeah, and in allowing the death penalty, you are also fully allowing them to have that
Yeah, I think it's
timestamp on their-
disrespectful to compare a murderer to an innocent victim.
I don't think anybody's life is worth more or worth less, so therefore, who is anybody to put a timestamp on someone's life besides God?
I
and
think you
that's-
can put your own timestamp on. We do it every day, You smoke a pack of cigarettes your whole life, you've put a timestamp on your life.
Right? It comes down to choice, I feel,
Yeah.
and like
It's an act of free will.
yeah, you should choose to not do these things, and because the state has laws and rules in place. And so, yeah, I just no, sure, technically no. The murderer isn't necessarily worth less than the innocent, but their actions would implicate that they have chosen to live a life vastly different from the innocent, and I think that is to be considered in when deciding is capital punishment ethical or not.
Yeah, and that's, I guess, the hard thing with free will is
Yeah.
that it is up to our choice, and because we are so flawed as humans,
Yeah.
We can make that mistake. And so that's at least why I am against
Yeah.
the death penalty.
No, I respect what you two have both articulated. It's good.
Oh,
And it
yeah,
makes me
absolutely.
think like I sympathize with a lot of what you're saying. It's more of a guttural feeling, and maybe that's indicative of the fact that I need to maybe think more about this.
Well, and I'll say, I, for the longest time, was very anti-death penalty. I actually switched end of high school. I did kind of a deep dive into Old Testament, New Testament, and fulfillment of the law type of stuff, and brought me to my conclusion in that, which we can totally have that conversation if you guys want to hear more about that. But yeah, I definitely sympathize with where you guys are coming from, and I do kind of lean closer to the middle of it, probably because we are playing with life here, and that's something you have to be very careful with.
All right, well, I think that finishes us off for the episode. I really appreciate everyone's contribution. I think everybody had really good points. All right, so we're going to finish off with some closing statements from each member.
Yeah, I really appreciate having this conversation with you guys. I am still completely against the death penalty because I think it does attack the dignity of the human life, but I understand where you guys are coming from, and I'm really glad we had this conversation.
Yeah, I'm also still steadfast in my position being against the death penalty. And I think that, moments like this where we can actually have a discussion on it brings light and hope for the future, that with other really important and defining topics, we're able to talk about that. So I'm really glad we were able to do that. And everybody can be forgiven through Christ. So amen to God, people.
Amen.
Yeah, I think that, this conversation has been really, really kind of eye-opening to me again, because I haven't touched on this subject in a hot minute. And it's been great to hear kind of both sides of it again. One point that I really like that you guys brought up was the cost efficiency thing. I think that really does make me think a lot about the way we've done it. And, I don't know, it's just interesting to think about the cost of it. I didn't, I guess, really ever think about that aspect. And so I'm glad you guys brought that up. And, kind of like Maddie said, I think it's important we have these conversations, and it's okay for conservatives to not agree on everything. But I think, one thing I value is every single one of us value the dignity of human life, and we may value it in a different way and see it in a different way, but we do place value on life. And I think that's what makes conservatives in a sense, is that we see the value of human life.
Yeah, I think one thing the listeners and everybody here can take away from this is the civility involved with our discussion. A lot of discussions, even between conservatives nowadays, get fiery and heated, and name-calling, and it's important to model your discussions with friends, kind of after this one. We're just here to try and find a middle ground and share perspectives, and I really appreciate the other side here for sharing their beliefs, because it's made me consider how I feel about this, and I'm going to need to think a little bit more. And if I choose to stick with still being very pro-death penalty, I'm going to need to come up with some more concrete steps or statements for why, and if I don't, you guys can take the pride in knowing that you were the pebble in the shoe. But with that being said, just thanks to everybody for a great conversation. With that being said, thanks for listening to Right on Campus. We post this podcast weekly, tackling current events and life as a conservative on campus. If you'd like to learn more about UWEC College Republicans, join our meetings Monday nights, Centennial 1704 at 7 p.m. We'll be back January 27th, and there will be no meetings until then. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at UWEC College Republicans, and be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube, and favorite and share this podcast if you're listening on Spotify. Have a great night. Thank you for listening to Right on Campus. We post this podcast once a week, where we talk about current events and life as a conservative on campus. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at UWEC College Republicans. Have a great night, and see you next time.